walk with that man, brother, is to walk with God.
I got that from the Nation of Islam.
He said the right thing with me that just shook. It shook me.
Ask Allah for something big.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. As I said, welcome back to another broadcast of I Have a Testimony. And I want to thank, as always, each and every one of you for taking the time out to tune into our shows. And I pray that you are finding them to be beneficial, informative, and inspirational. Today, we're blessed to have with us our guest, who's a hardworking sister who blessed me with the opportunity to travel to the city of Fort Worth a little over 2 weeks ago to participate in a very powerful panel discussion addressing violence in our community. It was a part of a larger event that actually took place in Fort Worth as well. And we're excited to have our sister, whose name, if you've seen the flyer, you know we're talking about. Sister Catina Muhammad is our guest. And here is a clip of our sister on the DJ Rockwell show responding to a question that he asked her on the show that was talking about the role or the image of women in hip hop.
Excellent. Sister Catina, you are a youth organizer, 26 years. Surely you have come across some young women who've expressed to you the pressure. Talk about that.
Yes, sir. There are natural human needs that have to be met at each psychological stage of development in every human being. One such stage is the stage of acceptance. And so we oftentimes tell our children things like, don't be a follower, be a leader, and that type of thing. That is good, but it's not good if it's out of the stage of psychological development that the child is in at that time. So you when you first come, you're in a stage where, children are very selfish, they're very one-centered, self-centered. As they start to grow up, they start to notice other people in the world and other people around them. And so they learn how to share, and they learn how to get along, and they learn how to wait, and those types of things. One such stage in the psychological development of the human being is acceptance. What is a natural stage to want to be accepted? It's okay to be a leader, but we were taught in our generation, in order to be a good leader, you got to be a good follower.
Come on now.
With you want at a certain stage of your development, going from childhood to adolescence, acceptance. And so what do? You do the thing that you see is getting the most acceptance.
Peace. And you heard our sister giving that great response to that actual question by our brother. And you can go and watch the full interview on DJ Rockwell's show. So let's bring our sister on. Assalamu alaikum, dear sister.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
Thank you for accepting the invitation to be a guest on this show, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invite. I'm humbled.
Well deserved. It's well deserved. So before we get into the interview, I once again want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to come to the city Fort Worth to participate in that panel discussion and conduct a presentation on conflict resolution. Have you gotten any feedback about that weekend, and what are your next plans?
Oh my, thank you for that. Yes, sir. And I have to admit, the most feedback we got from that event was the panel. Everybody was impressed with the panel. They thought it was very well balanced. Your answers and the answers from the pastor that was on the panel and our dear sister from Austin. And I think that it just gave a representation of where we are in this time. And I think that when you have those who are sincere in our efforts, wherever we're doing them, because everybody there, save myself and the pastor, we're from different cities. You from New Orleans, the sister from Austin, and then brother, he's from a different side of Fort Worth, but we're all doing what we can do to make efforts to make a difference in our community. So we've gotten a lot of feedback, and thank you, because even the conflict resolution part, which we thought this year would pair very well with forgiveness. That's the theme of what we do every year, and we do it in observation of the Holy Day of Atonement. So forgiveness is the sixth step of atonement. And we like to pull that out because it's one of the most difficult steps. And so how can you forgive if we aren't able to resolve the conflict or the issue that was keeping us ill at ease with one another in the first place? So we got very good reviews from the community and just at large, and from other organizers.
Good. So it appears that each year you are using one of the steps that's a part of the atonement process as the theme.
Yes, indeed. So forgiveness is always the running theme, because when you're talking about forgiveness, you really are talking about what have I done that can be an injury, and okay, am I taking this thing too far? What can I do to relinquish the resentment that I have towards my brother and my sister? And oftentimes, so much time and space gets in between the injury and the resolve that by the time you get to the resolve, it's like, you know what? What was I feeling like this for in the first place again? So we keep that as an underlying principle, and then we build every year, such as this year with the conflict resolution aspect.
Okay, good. And I know that in conjunction with Muhammad Mosque number 52 there, this event was also by your organization. I think you said it's Yasin, right? Is it?
Yasina Al-Nur.
Yeah, can you talk about your organization and just what's the overall mission of it?
Absolutely. So Yasina Al-Nur is we are an alternative mental health and life coaching organization. It was founded on one lecture by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan called The Problems in Relationships. And in that lecture, Brother Willie, as I was listening, I discovered that, wow, this really is the basis of our problems. And we can see the pathology from bad or poor relationships, particularly those foundational relationships, the relationship with mother, the relationship with father, the relationship inside the home, and how it leads to and can lead to poor mental health. And so our goal and our mission is to help to restore sanity and mental wellness in our communities by helping families to repair. And so as a life coach, I am a certified life coach. Forgiveness and happiness is my niche, right? We can't truly be happy if we're harboring a lot of resentment towards others or even towards our own selves. And so we, every year, again, we do this, but then we also we do life coaching, and we have life coaching clients. We do relationship coaching to help relationships to heal, mend, repair. And that can be on any level, father, son, mother, daughter, husband, wife, your neighbor. We need to be able to repair these relationships, and we do it through what we call, or our motto or slogan, if you will, is restoring your ability to love.
Beautiful. And as we get ready to transition to this other part, one of the things I like about this show is that I have the opportunity to hear people's journey on how they came into the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And so that's my next question. Can you share with us how you first became acquainted with the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and then eventually became a member of the Nation of Islam?
Wow, that's a story indeed. So I was a little radical kind of little sister in junior high school, and for some reason they come get me, Catina, you gotta stand up for this or stand up for that, or somebody's mistreating this person, and protest about this and all that type of thing. So I was walking around and I'd have my little kufi on and my red, black, and green medallion. And this was my life in junior high school. I'm always getting kicked out of class for saying something pro-Black. And so I had gotten kicked out of class one day, and I'm walking down the hallway and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to explain to my mother yet one more time of getting kicked out of class. And it was a guy in the hallway. And he said, "Hey, you." He said, I looked and I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Are you down with Elijah Muhammad?" Now, Brother Willie, I had never heard that name before, but it just sounded like he was somebody I should have been being down with. So I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And he said, "You know how we look back in the day when we don't really believe you." So he said, "Okay." He said, "Come here. I want to get your number." And I'm looking. He said, "Just chill." He was like, "I already got a girl. I want to get your number. I want to talk to you." I was like, "Okay." So back in the day, at that time, I didn't have talk on the boy telephone privileges, talk on the phone to boy privileges. So I was like, "Well, what time you calling so I can make sure that I get the phone?" And so I'm going to call you at 8 o'clock. I was like, "Okay, make it 8 o'clock. So I'm in the house and I'm waiting on my grandmother to get off the phone. I got a Mississippi grandma, so that means she can talk. So I'm waiting and I'm pacing the floor, trying not to be obvious. She hung that phone up. It had to be 7:59 because as soon as I could get in there and swoop the phone up, the phone was ringing and it was him. The brother's name was Gordon. I'll never forget it. And he talked and we talked and he asked me questions about just black questions and Black history and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of these things. And I'm answering the questions, the best that I can. And at that time, Club Nouveau had redone the song Lean on Me. And that was like the little hype song in the school back then and all that. Plus I was an MC at the time. And so, he talking until he said, "Now, I want you to remember the name, Elijah Muhammad. You got it?" Yeah, I got it. He said, "No, remember that name, Elijah Muhammad." I said, "I got it." So we got off the phone. I had never seen that brother again from that day to this. But sometime later, I went to a little bookstore in downtown St. Louis, that's my hometown, called Little Africa. And I go to the bookstore and I'm in there and I'm looking for something Black that I can rap about, really. And so I go in the store and I look to my left and I see a book called Message to the Black Man. And I saw the name Elijah Muhammad. And I said, "Oh, that's the book. That's him. That's the man." But it said Message to the Black Man. So I was like, let me make sure I can buy this book. So I go to the counter and I asked the lady, I'm like, "Excuse me, can girls buy this book?" I was 13, okay? So I was like, "Can girls buy this book?" And she just laughed and laughed. And she found that very funny. And she went to the back and got her husband. And he came out, she told him, and he found that funny. And she was like, "Yes, Black man as in Black man and woman and, one species." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I bought that book and I looked up and there was a Muslim cookbook there. And I said, "Well, if anybody know how to cook, it's the Muslims. Let me get that." I ain't never heard of Muslims before. It was just something that sounded in me that just made sense. So I get the book and I got it and I'm taking the bus home and I go and I sit on my grandmother's living room floor on her little shag carpet. I took the lamp shade off the lamp because it was very dim light bulbs. And I'm sitting on that floor and I opened up the book. And the messenger is going in. Did God say that he was just a spirit, or did someone say it of him? Did God say that he was not a man? Did someone say it of him? They teach that he walks, talks, breathes, rises, and flies. He's interested in the affairs of human, yet he himself is not a human. And at every sentence, that's right. That's true. Somebody said it of him. I'm just excited. And I'm sitting there, and the only reason why I got to page 2 is because the end of the sentence was on page 2. I was hooked from page 1. I get to page 2, and I finish the sentence, and I close the book, and I said, "Allah," and it was the first time I called God Allah, and I said, "Allah," I said, "I'm going to follow him." I said, "I believe that he's your messenger. I'm going to follow him." I said, but can you give me a little time? Because I'm only 13 and we Christians, my mama kill me if I talk about going to follow this man. And so, lo and behold, I lost the book, Brother Willie. Don't know what happened to the book. I hadn't read further from there. And 3 years later, when I turned 16, my mother and I were at home watching Roots. And we're watching Roots, and we had just gotten to the point where Kunta Kinte was on the boat, and he was saying, Allah the compassionate, Allah the, and I said, oh, that was our God before we got over here. And all of that, and FOI knocked on my door trying to sell me the Final Call newspaper. And I went, I was like, and at that time, it was $1, and it came out every 2 weeks, I believe. And I was like, oh, brother, I ain't got no dollar, but where are you all at? And he's like, well, we over across the water. Now, St. Louis, you have St. Louis and East St. Louis, but East St. Louis is across the bridge, and it's actually in Illinois. So it's called East St. Louis, Illinois, but I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. You really don't go on the east side unless you tough or unless you tough. I wasn't neither one of those. So I didn't go. I'm like, oh, God, So that was at 16. At 17, I get a phone call from by now, we read the message in the books. We read Our Savior Has Arrived, which happened to be my favorite book. We read all of those, and we having people over to the house. We kicking knowledge. Like back in the day, that's what we did, right? We got together. We knew Hebrew Israelites. We knew just some of all of the conscious communities. They would come over to my house. I would cook, and we would get down. And so she called me, a friend of mine. We processed, registered. We had been friends since the 2nd grade. And she called, and I said I had to go upstairs to answer the phone. And when I went upstairs, the phone stopped ringing, but the news. So this was February. Because the news, Fox 30, had the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on there, and I saw the picture of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the back. I had not heard of Minister Farrakhan. That was my first encounter with him. So I looked, and at the television there, the controversial Minister Louis Farrakhan spoke to a crowd of over 13,000 and and he's best known for his anti-Semitic statements and And I promise you, I sat there and I listened to that, and I said, yeah, but is he telling the truth? That's all I want to know. So as I asked that question, the news segment ended. My friend called back, and I answered the phone. I said, hey, I'm looking at the news, and I see this man, his name Farrakhan. I said, but I see a picture of the messenger behind him. She said, that's who you want. Find out where that mosque is in St. Louis. I'm moving back. She had moved to Detroit. She had found, at that time, it was Student Minister Rasul. He was over the Detroit mosque. I found the messenger's son. So now you got to find the mosque there in St. Louis. And she came back. We found the mosque. We processed in. We were like 18, 19 years old. We were 19. And by the time I recited, which was Wednesday, July 27, 1994, I had just turned 20 years old. And that began my sojourn in the Nation of Islam.
Wow. So I've heard several people's testimony, but listening to yours, it is just evidence that you are meant to be where you are now. At 13 to have that, and then you get into you watching the movie Roots, and then the FOI come. It is like that. I'm like, yo, it really is confirmation that we are meant to be where we are. You know what I'm saying? At 13 years of age, that, and even how you were getting in trouble because you standing up, you have that consciousness. Definitely meant to be where you're. That's a beautiful testimony. And so 94, you end up getting registered. Now we fast forward to 2023. When you look back over your time in the Nation of Islam, what are some of your most memorable moments?
Oh, wow. I have to go back to, back in the day, we would like vie with one another in righteousness to get the latest tapes from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. That's when they were on literal cassette tapes, right? And we would, whoever got the newest tape, then you would, oh, I got that new tape with Minister Farrakhan. We got with Farrakhan. I got that new Farrakhan. And we would go and we would meet at each other's homes. And I was always cooking because, again, I got Southern grandmothers and grandparents. And I'll tell you, the teachers were so it did, Brother Will. It seemed like this was just where I'm supposed to be, because it reminded me so much of my family and their way and how they are, like just generally kind to others and that type of thing. Well, when I came in 94, so now we're preparing 94, 95 for the Million Man March. And so the same sister and I, we were going to a school, and we were at the school, and we were we had joined the student government, first of all, because they would send the school buses to take the children to church and things like that. And we found that, I was like, oh, they ain't going to the mosque. Oh, but we got to get somebody to take them to the mosque. So they said, well, you have to present it before the school board. So we go before the board and all of that. Again, we're 19, 20. And we go before the board, and we're saying our piece, and we got them to start taking students to the mosque. Well, when it came time for the Million Man March, we did it again, and we had about 3 buses that took students to the Million Man March. So that was one of my most memorable moments. But the biggest piece to that is my grandmother, who raised me. Actually, I was raised by both of my grandmothers on my mother and my father's side, and they are both Southern women, right? I used to call them 2 old Southern Christian women. Just love in a bucket with these women. And my grandmother on my mother's side, she wasn't really hearing me being a Muslim because she thought that I had left Jesus. And so I came in the house one day. Now, imagine, if you will, my grandmother is 4'11", okay? And she was an extremely large woman. And they told me, Brother Willie, that she couldn't see. Well, she happened to see me that day. And when I came in the door, she met me at the front door, and she hit me. And she said, "You done left Jesus?" And I said, "No, ma'am." But she hit me so hard, I done fell out the door. And I'm like, "No, ma'am, I didn't leave Jesus. They tell me you over there in that funny kind of church, you know?" And I'm like, "No, ma'am. See, Mom, it's not like that," and all of that. And I sat there and I listened to her lecture, and I left the house, and I said, Allah, I said, please, this is my grandmother, and I love her. She raised me. Please help her to understand who Minister Farrakhan is, so that we can have a good relationship. I don't want to not be in communication with my grandmother. Long comes the Million Man March. Now, my grandmother was a faithful listener on a radio show, AM radio, talk radio, called Richard Onion Harden. And as the minister was touring the country, talking about the Million Man March, and he stopped by St. Louis, and he was on the Richard Onion Harden show. And he spoke, so I don't know what he said on that show, but Allah blessed it to get to my grandmother. And I happened to come back over there because, I was staying away because she had taught me a little lesson. Sometimes you get him through the ears, and sometimes you get it when they're knocking you out. And so I was kind of staying away, and I said, I'm going to go over here and see her. I hadn't seen her in about a month or so, and I went over there and saw her, and I walked through the door, and she said, "Oh, so this Farrakhan, he like a Martin Luther King." I said, yes. I was going to jump on it. Whatever understanding she had, I was going to jump on it. So he's like a civil rights. He stands up for people and there's still civil rights. I said, "Yes, ma'am. He just wants the people to be able to get along and be good and that type of thing." I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's him." She said, "All right, well, he all right then." I said, "Oh, thank you." It was my first, I'm pretty sure there were others, but it was my first real memorable prayer where I just had to pray to the God, call him by name, and ask him to intervene in that relationship. So I can bear witness to having good relationships is just another way of having relationships with the God. If we could be good to one another, then we'll find it easier to obey God. It's when we get to one, because we can obey him on a mystery sense, right? If he's all out there in the ether somewhere. But when we're reading the Quran, and I don't care what he's talking about. He can be talking about raising mountains in the earth. He's going to go somewhere soon. You're going to read, and Allah loves those who does good to others. And Allah loves the doers of good to others. And there's a blessing for the doers of good to others. And he favors the doers of good to others. And so he is interested in our personal affairs, our affairs as a people, but in our personal affairs. But that has to be one of my most memorable moments, because Allah truly turned my grandmother's heart from the unknown and not liking the minister to every time he was on, from the Donahue to everybody else, get him, Farrakhan on, get him, she would call everybody in the family, and now the whole family had to sit down and listen to Minister Farrakhan.
Wow. Yo, you have one of the most interesting testimonies and experiences that I have heard, and actually to go through that and go from that experience to her actually being one of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's biggest cheerleaders. So thank you for sharing that. And in the nation that time, and now, in addition to the work that you do in the community as organizing with young people, life coach, relationship coach, and all of that, you are also one of the you're in the student ministry class of Muhammad Mosque number 52, actually the assistant student minister there. Can you talk about how you became a part of the ministry class?
In Fort Worth or just in general?
Well, I was so evidently you became a part of the ministry class before you got to Fort Worth. So it's just in general.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. When I was about 4 years old, my father had come home one day and he just sat in a chair and he was so tired. And I looked at my father and I said, he tired. And so I went over there and he had fallen asleep, and I went over and I hugged him, and he hugged me back and he said, baby girl, he said, you always do make me happy. Right. And I said, oh, that's my purpose. That's my reason for being on planet Earth, is to make people happy and to heal people. And so by the time I was 9 years old, I wanted to be a pastor and a preacher. And because at that time at 9, I thought that all pastors were civil rights agents and workers, and all pastors could heal people. That was my thinking at 9. And so one day I'm playing church with my grandmother and my brother, and we would play church all the time because she was getting up in age and she didn't go out as much. And it just made her feel good to be playing church. And I always had to be the preacher. So I would push my little brother out the way, and, I'd be the preacher. He had to be the deacon or something. But and I'd get my little Bible and I'd be preaching. And so one particular night, my grandmother said, come over here and talk to me. She said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I finally had the nerve to say it. I had never vocalized it before in my life. I said, I want to be a pastor. And she said, oh, baby. She said, well, women folk can't be preachers. Now, bear in mind, my grandmother is from the Mississippi South, born somewhere in the early 1900s. We're thinking around 1920 or so. She didn't have a birth certificate. It wasn't commonplace for Black people to have birth certificates during that time. And so in the Mississippi South. And so her reality was that men folk didn't like women in the pulpit. She said, but you could be an evangelist and or a missionary. She said, you could be a missionary. And I was like, what's a missionary? I was done. I didn't have a backup plan. I have nothing. I knew I was going to be a preacher and I was going to be able to heal people. That's what I'm going to do. And so when I told her, and my grandmother had never told me like no, or I couldn't do something or anything in my life. And so it was a shock. And I didn't even know what a missionary was. So it's, having a word that you don't fully, know the meaning to can definitely cause some issues or problems. So I was like, oh no. And I just cried and I cried. And she said, and that's when she began to tell me stories of her mother, who was a midwife and she was a missionary. She would go around ministering to people and she would be healing people. She knew the science of herbs and things like that. And she would be healing people and that sort of thing. And it patched me up a little bit, but it didn't really help because I didn't have no other plans. And I went to school and the teacher asked, what did I want to be? And oh, come on, not you too. So I thought I escaped. And then the next day she was like, yeah, we didn't get Catina. Catina, come over here and answer the question. I was like, a teacher, And so that was that. And it took like years for me to really be able to realize it. Well, one day at the mosque, and I the student minister at that time in St. Louis, he opened up the ministry class. And this was in like 1995, I believe. And he opened up the ministry class, and I joined the ministry class. And so moving forward from every city that I went to, I would be in the ministry class. Well, how I got in the ministry class in Fort Worth is a whole nother story in and of itself, because I was just visiting. I was visiting Fort Worth because my son had asked me to come, and I was in the city, and the minister gave the instructions that we were going back to the mosque after COVID. And I just happened to be in Fort Worth, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, because I was in Atlanta at that time, and in the student class under student Mr. Sharif, and which was a beautiful experience. And so I was just visiting. That's all I was doing, was visiting. And I go to the mosque, and I hear student Minister Lee, and he's teaching, and I said, he teaching. And that was all. I got up, and I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm speaking to the believers. I'm all happy because we back in the mosque and all of that. And one of the brothers came to me and was like, are you here? Are you here? Or are you just here? And I was like, I'm just here. And so I got a call, I believe. No, I came back to the mosque on the next meeting because I got a travel letter sent over from Atlanta. And student Mr. Lee said, are you here or are you just here? And I said, well, I'm here. He said, well, how long is here? I said, I probably will be here about 3 months or so. He said, okay, good. I want you to be in the ministry class, And so, I was like, okay. And all along, and I'm starting to suspect that Mr. Lee has something to do with it now that I'm talking about it. All along, his brother is steady trying to get me to stay. And my children were working on me to stay because we're very close family, and they just, I don't know, they act like I think certain things they can't get past if mama not here. And so I had all this pull to stay. And one day I got called into the student minister's office, and I was, a little nervous because, you either did something right or you didn't. But the student minister would be calling you, and his captain was there, and he said, I'm going to be getting a call from Chicago soon. And they're going to ask me who my assistant student minister is. And I'm looking, and he said, I'm going to have to tell him it's you. And I said, oh my goodness. And brother student minister Willie, you could have bought me for a wooden nickel. I almost fell out right there. And I said, wait a minute, y'all got to give me a minute to take a deep breath. And I just kept working ever since. But it's for me, it's a passion, it's a love, it's an excuse for me to be able to get up next to our people, right? And pastor, minister unto them, and help them to at least know somebody care about you in the world. And I'm just starting with Sister Catina, but I'm like a one-way sign. I'm turning you right on to Minister Farrakhan, because I wouldn't even know how to love you if it wasn't for him. So that's how it happened in Fort Worth.
Beautiful. And we need more sisters, especially like in the passing of our Sister Ava Muhammad. May Allah be pleased with her. But we need more, to keep up that tradition and keep up that legacy, that people can see that we also have sisters who are gifted and spirited and can teach these teachings as well. And since we were talking about your journey in the ministry class, some people have various challenges and fears, like speaking before people is one of the fears that many people have. Were there any challenges or fears you had to face as being part of the ministry class? And if so, yes, what were they and how did you overcome them?
Yes, sir. One of the biggest fears that I had and still experience is making certain that I say the right thing to God's people. I'm always cognizant. One of my first teachers in Islam, he was a student. He was a secretary, actually, under the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in New York prior to 75. And he became my mentor early on in Islam. And when I first told him that I wanted to be in the ministry, he said, he met me at the mosque and he brought his briefcase. He was, you know, he from the old school, and he had his briefcase, and at our mosque at that time, it had a classroom in it. And he walked me to the classroom and he wrote on the board, and I sitting in the first row in the chair in there, and I'm just waiting on for what he's going to teach me or tell me. And he said, lesson number 1, the believers do not belong to you. They belong to Allah. And he packed his briefcase up, and he walked out the door and left. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, is he gonna come back? What do I do? Do I move? And so after about 20 minutes or so, I get up and I walk out, and I'm like, what happened to him? And they was like, oh, he left. And I go and I call him and I'm like, well, what happened? He said, that's your lesson. That's all you need to know. Anything else you could be taught directly through the class. And I was like, oh my God. And so I keep that in mind as I'm talking to the people. So there's always a feeling of trepidation, if you will, when I'm going before the people, even if, you know, when I'm speaking from the rostrum, when I'm bringing on our local student minister, you know, and or able to be in the community representing him. He has allowed me to go places and represent him in our city. And it's always I have to have a conversation with the God so that I can get out of the way and allow for his spirit to take over, because the people don't belong to me. They belong to him. And I always just want to give them what he would have for me to give them.
Beautiful, beautiful. And since we're talking about, you mentioned our brother several times, and he's such a great brother. We're talking about student minister, Brother Louis Muhammad. I think the mere fact that also he has you as his assistant student minister and you're a sister, it also shows his heart, and it shows his thinking, right? In regards to, he's not one that get caught up where she's a sister. He's seeing that you have the spirit, you have the ability, you have the compassion, and you love the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and all of that's related. So, and you have a, listening to you talk, Sister Catina, you have a specialness about you. There's something, you're here to do something and move out on it, whatever it is. You have a certain special, just hearing your story, you know, move out on it, what God has placed in your heart, and do the mission. So, but let's take a moment to talk about just the leadership style and the work ethic of our brother Louis Muhammad.
You know, I often say to him in a joking kind of spirit, I say, if anybody say, but I wanted to say something to Student Minister Lee and he didn't listen to me, but they're going to start a fight with Sister Catina. I say, because he will listen. And not just that, he refers to himself as being, you know, more of a yes person. If a person brings something to him that they want to do that is some good for our people in the community, he's not one to hold a person back. Case in point, I am a sister, and I do serve as his assistant student minister by Allah's grace and permission. He's not one to do that. His leadership style, I can't necessarily call it democratic in whole, because he will make the tough decisions, but he will allow for others' input. Right? He will listen. He will allow for a person to be able to say, well, what if we tried it this way? Or what if we do that? And I've seen people bring things to him about moving out in the community, and he thinks in such a way you can almost see it digitizing on his forehead, right? When the messenger said our brains were created to think properly, you can almost see the math going off in his head, and he's fitting it in with what he knows, what he's been taught, what he believes will be pleasing to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, what is in line with our way, our structure. And he's very, very good about, if he sees us veering too far to the right or too far to the left, and just scooting you on back over without invalidating you, without crushing the spirit or the desire for you to do the good that you have and want to do in the community. So I applaud. I used to say of him, I still say it. I said, so Mr. Lee, you know, as a student minister, you're pretty dope. You know, that was a term for our era, just meaning that, you know, that he has the components of, you know, somebody who is dignified as a student minister in the Nation of Islam, but he's not so dignified that he's stiff, you know, that he can't laugh at a good funny or a good joke, or, you know, that he can't be hospitable. He can lead, but he can still put himself to the back and still follow, right? And still obey instructions and that type of things. Very personable. I tested the grounds, Brother Willie. I went out in the community, you know, and I would just say, you know, it's a minister over there, it's a student, what that minister did? And and depending on where I was, the people would know what they're talking about. Oh, you're looking for Mr. Lee. Mm-hmm. You know, and things like that. And they love him in the community, which I think is a necessary part of being a minister who is over a city. So I applaud him, and I admire his leadership, because he truly does strive to lead in love. And to end that, he's not one who is afraid to say, I don't know. If he doesn't know, he'll just say, I don't know. He'll get you the answer, you know, as he can, but he will not stand up there and do what I call just making something up. You know, he will give you the proper answer as he knows it, as he understands it, or he ain't gonna give you none at all. He'll tell you, I'll look for that answer. I'll try to find that answer.
And that's one of the reasons why I definitely want to get him to this city, so we can have a good time. And also those believers who haven't heard him or don't know of him, they get the opportunity to experience that of him as well. So we're going to have to do some things to make sure that happens. And as we transition to this, we opened up talking about with the clip of you being on DJ Rockwell's show, and on the DJ Rockwell show was yourself and two of the other sisters, Sister Audrey and Sister Starla, who writes for the Final Call. Sister Audrey also has her own magazine. And as we see, the title of the show was Restoring the Image of Black Women in Hip Hop and Why It Matters. So my question that I would like to ask you is, you know, why does it matter? Why does restoring the image of Black women, of the Black woman in hip hop, matter?
Thank you for that question. Anytime you have a revolution, you have to have music to go with the revolution. Now, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad has boldly stated that this is the time of resurrection of our people. He also has said, and Mother Tanetta has been very instrumental in demonstrating music, medicine, and color being the essentials of life. So as we are in the time that we are in, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan making the strides that he is making to further secure the future of the Black man and woman, the woman's image must be restored, because you don't judge civilization by the male, you judge it by the woman. The woman then has to be placed back on top of civilization. Why? Because she plays such a pertinent role. She is the first teacher. She is the first nurse. And so in order for her to properly teach, properly nourish, properly heal, then she herself has to be a product of that type of experience, and she herself has to be civilized, and not just in the way, certainly not in the way of our enemy civilization, but in the way of righteousness the planet over. So in hip hop, It is a sound that came about because of our struggle at that time. It was the music of the revolution of that time. And I have said that music, or the hip hop era, restored to the Black man and woman the great I am. Music, I am this, I am that. Run DMC, I am son of Bifer, brother of Al. You know, they established the I am. Well, you can't do anything unless you know who you are. So there's an axiom that says, in order to have, you must be and do, right? Be, then do, then you have. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, get up and do something for yourself. Well, in order for us to do that, he knew that we were going to have to establish a beingness. What is our I am? And so he asked us, who is the original man? Well, this was reestablishing for us our I am. And so the compatible music was hip hop. And so in hip hop, the woman's I am has to be reestablished. Her image has to be reestablished. And it will be once we know who we are and then walk boldly in who we are, reclothe ourselves in the mind and the message of God, and reclothe our physical selves, and then our image will be restored so that our will and our way, which is the will and way of God, will be restored in the hearts and minds of the people.
Good, good. And you know, there's a rapper from the city of New Orleans has recently gone viral for calling out Rick Ross and Meek Mill, brother D1. And as I've been reading the comments back and forth and thinking about the weight of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I know sometimes it can be a challenge in regards to critiquing the music and not condemning our people who are being exploited and being manipulated and being used, right? And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to me is the best example of how to do that. And I'm thinking about like the sister who's now, she's all over social media, Sexy, they call her Sexy Red, but she's one of the many. How do you think in regards to where we can critique the rap, we can critique their behavior, but we don't, how can we do that and avoid being a part of that effort that is trying to blame hip hop for everything that's wrong in America?
Wow. Yes, sir. By putting the clean glass next to the dirty glass, we are now talking to our brothers and sisters. Like you said, sometimes we're very mean, we're very invalidating, we're very condescending. It's really not because we're so much angry with the artists themselves, but we see that we really have been duped out of our own music. And the problem is, Brother Willie, in order for us to solve any problem at all, we first got to be able to admit there is a problem. So in a lecture that Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan did on fear, faith, and truth, he talked about how he was walking, he jogging, and there was a bull standing in his way. But imagine what would the outcome have been if he just tried to ignore that the bull was there. Or if he didn't even acknowledge that there was a bull there in the first place. Well, Allah gonna get me out of it. Get you out of what? We're not even acknowledging that the bull is there. This is what has happened to us in hip hop. We can see that the record labels have done this and they're promoting that and they're paying our people to sing this filthy music. We have not yet acknowledged our wrong in it because we fell for it, right? We're dealing with, if we could just use our language for the moment, we're dealing with the master of technology. And so when you can make a people fall out of love with the art itself and in love with the money and the fame and all of that, more so than the principle, more so than the words, more so than the talent, then now I can draw you out and have you do anything because it's about the money. We lost our we didn't just lose our control, we gave it up, right? And so we were tricked out of it, and we started to where gangster rap was underground. It became the norm, and conscious rap went underground. Well, what happened? Who's buying it? We were. And we were buying it, and we were supporting it. And if we notice, we got angrier and angrier. We got less and less inclined to want to sit down and talk with one another. We got less and less inclined to want to sit down and sup with one another. And if one thing Black people like doing is sitting around each other, eating and talking and enjoying ourselves, we didn't even want that because the music was taking us apart. So we have to look at the fact that we got duped. We got tricked out of our own music and our own talent, trying to chase money and the fame of it as dictated by someone who just didn't mean us any good in the first place, i.e. the record labels and all of that. So now that we're still perpetuating it, we have to put that clean glass up against the dirty glass and say, okay, well, we got a sexy red over here. Well, anytime you do one thing wrong, you gotta have 5 things to counter just that one thing. So now we got to produce 5. I mean, come on now. Just because you conscious rapper don't mean it got to be lame. Don't mean the beat got to be lame. You know what I mean? You still got, because what put the conscious rapper on top in the first place? It was the dopeness, if you will, of his lyrics. It was what he was saying. So if they're not saying anything and we're actually getting tired of it, you got to have something in the place that can say, look, Sexy Red, okay? We value your talent, okay? I've never heard it, but I'm just giving us an example. We value your talent. Try talking about this. Ain't nobody gonna buy it. Well, here's the thing. One thing the record producers like is money. If we stopped buying the other thing and we started buying just that one good record that you put out, eventually they would get the picture. But we have to understand that they really do get it now. It's just that it goes with their agenda to keep the music in such a degenerative state.
That's interesting in regards to the, because what I found interesting, there were many people cheering on the legitimate criticism that Brother D1 had of the content of the music of those 2 artists that he called out. But as I looked at it, many of the people who were cheering him on, I have not seen them even share anything that D1 did prior to this. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, don't just celebrate that D1 is calling out these rappers and then you don't support D1. You don't buy his album. You don't share his album. And that's the other thing that has to be done. Like, we got to really support those who we say are making the content that we want. And that's where sometimes we are missing, I feel like we're missing that. And I want to close on this. This is a standard question that I ask everybody. The title of this show is I Have a Testimony, and it's really to give people, those who've had the opportunity to meet the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, or even those who have not had the opportunity to meet the minister yet. But I ask people the question, if you could stand before the world and testify to the world of a quality of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, what quality would you choose to testify to the world about him?
Oh, wow. I would testify that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is magnanimous. He, as I watch him, he is very forgiving. Is a gradient of 10 lower than magnanimous, in that he exemplifies what it means to love and what it means to pardon and forgive. His humanitarianism is so in line with the natural order of things that it shines another layer of light around his divinity. And so a lot of times we got it right with that divinity, right? But that humanitarian in him, that part of him that makes him stop and look at others when they're meeting him or just shaking his hand and he says something to them, sparking life in them. I said of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan one day that I noticed Brother Willie, when I had the chance to meet him briefly, shake his hand, was because of an act of obedience. I went and did something that he had asked us to do. And so I graduated in the first class that he had asked us to do in taking that particular course. And I got a chance to meet him. And when I walked on the stage and I met him and I shook his hand, or he shook my hand, or the hands shook, he was shining so bright that I said, if we had turned the lights out, as a matter of fact, if it was a blackout across 7 city blocks, we would not need to trouble an electrician, because the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was shining so brightly from within. It's not that the light is shining down on him. He's illuminating from the inside. I said he was shining so bright, you wouldn't even need to tell you, we wouldn't even miss the lights being turned off. And because he shines so bright, but he is so his way, I study him. And I must say, I'm in love with him as a righteous man, but as a man who exemplifies what it means to be a friend to others. And I mean a true friend, a friend who he listens, a friend who helps others, a friend who is compassionate. And if you hear how he speaks well of others, you mentioned our dear sister Dr. Ava, and he spoke so well. He was so humble when he talked about being able to create with her. And he said, I don't know if you all would understand this, but when I found Sister Ava, I found someone that I could create with. And he was so humble in saying that when he led us to the particular modality that he gave to us for our mental wellness inside the nation. He said he did all of this long lecture and this talk, and it was brilliant and it was beautiful and it was divine, and it came from the God. And he got to the end in his sincerity and he said, I just want the believers to be happy. Because he knew we weren't happy. We were feigning happiness, but you really can't, because he knew also that happiness is synonymous with sanity. And so it's that for me. I would testify that, because that one lecture, The Problem in Relationships, pulled me up out of my own personal situation and level of grief when I lost my child. Because on there, he explained it in love and in no certain uncertain terms. The man could have just picked the phone up and called me himself and said, I have a word for you, when he said what he said on that lecture. And it saved my life and it saved my sanity.
Praise be to Allah. Sister, we thank you for what you shared, and we thank you for your testimony and your beautiful spirit and all that you are doing. I'll just continue to keep encouraging you to continue to go forward, continue to shine your light, continue to do the work in the city of Fort Worth and even beyond. Don't put a limit on yourself. Don't put a ceiling over you. Allah has something for you to do, and move out on it in the greatest of faith, in the greatest of courage and confidence. So
thank you, sir.
We thank you for this opportunity, and may Allah continue to bless you. And assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
And I'll say, is there anything else you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say before we log off? Because I know sometimes stuff come up and we forget.
You know what? I just had the funniest little story about Mr. Lee. We took him to St. Louis. Somebody hired Yasin Al-Nur to come and mediate some conflicts with some local farmers and things in St. Louis. And so I said, student minister, because it was up to me, I'd be taking them all over the country, right? And student minister, you want to come to St. Louis and do this. So we went and we did it. We were able to, really do a good job for that. But he spoke at our mosque that day. And I said, student minister Willie, yeah, get him in New York. You can't hardly bring him nowhere though, because he shows out everywhere he go. Just as a student minister of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So we get to St. Louis and we're there, and everybody's like, "Oh, I see you came with student minister Lee," and I'm like, "Yeah, I did," and everything, because there were people there that had known him, but he spoke. And when I tell you, you know how we say fiery minister and all of that. He spoke and he lit the city he left it on fire, okay? To the point where I got called in the office by my former MGT captain, and she says, "How dare you keep this secret from us? You didn't tell me your student minister could go like this." He really, really, really just affected the people's spirit, so much in that city, and everybody was and it was an example to me, right? As someone under him, as someone in the ministry and aspiring to be able to have that type of effect on people. But it was just, everybody's not blaming me. She didn't tell us that. As much as you talk, you didn't tell us about, his student minister. And I just personally believe that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has brilliant student ministers like yourself, a student minister Lee, my student minister from St. Louis, all over, who have things to offer to our nation. So I just wanted to say that.
No, that is true. And Brother Lee is one of them, is one of them. And I pray that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan understands and gets it able to see, because the minister is dealing with so much. He doesn't know each and every person. Brother Lee has met him before and been at the table with him before, but that our nation and many others could get the opportunity to experience the jewel that we have in the city of Fort Worth, Texas, and in our region.
Yes, sir.
So, and thank you, sis. And I pray that people who are watching this interview, that they get something from it as well. And as we close, where can you be reached online if people want to reach you for your services? How can they get in contact with you?
So I'm at www.yasinah, YASINAH, Alnur, ALNUR.com. And our contact information, you can email us on there, and we are happy to serve as best we can in any of those situations that we listed, even with the conflict resolution.
Definitely. So thank you, sister, and may Allah continue to bless you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
And so for those who have tuned in, we thank you for tuning in. Well, so our sister's back. 1 second, as I did that. We thank you for tuning in to see this, a beautiful interview and a beautiful testimony. At 13, that our sister was able to realize that this teaching is correct. That is a blessing, because many 13-year-olds are not doing that. So we thank you all for tuning in. We ask that you continue to tune in. You spread this interview and continue to tune into I Have a Testimony and share the word, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. Peace.